So earlier on in the E-mini S&P Facebook thread, someone asked me to share some thoughts about the lunar cycles. And I just wanted to go over some stuff with you here that I've gone over with my students. I'm not sure if it's going to play out or not, but I think it's important enough to share with everybody here today. In essence, what I'd like to do is focus on sort of weaponizing the lunar phases in relation to what's expected at those times that occur. So everywhere on my chart that you see a small green dot, this is the S&P June contract. So everywhere you see a small green dot, that's a first quarter phase. So that's a moon half full. And you'll see as I move my cursor around here, there's a first quarter phase. Here's a first quarter phase. So there are 3 first quarter phases on my chart right now. Everywhere on my chart you see a small red dot is a third quarter phase. So there's 1, there's 2, and there's 3 quarter phases. Everywhere on my chart you see a large green dot is a full moon, and there are 3 of those there. And everywhere on my chart you see a large red dot is a new moon, and there are 4 presently on the screen. So one of the things that I do when I'm working with lunar phases is something called a constellation analysis. And it's not what you think. It's basically looking at how certain signals have aligned themselves in relation to each other surrounding price action. So for example, on this chart right here, starting at the first quarter phase, I'm just going to take and draw a line connecting that green dot to this green dot, that green dot to that red dot, and then that red dot to this red dot. And you'll see there's kind of a check mark pattern here across all 4 of those. Well, this constellation has a rhyme or an echo in relation to it that we're currently experiencing, and I've been teaching this in my class, and several of the students have taken advantage of it with options, calls and puts. So let me pull the signals up on top of the highlighted area here. I'm just left clicking and on the shift key and scrolling backwards, and now all those signals are up on top. So right here what we see is sort of a sequence of events. There is a fairly large bull day, and then around the full moon day there's a second fairly large bull day. We get up into the third quarter phase. There's a pullback that also features a fairly large bear day, and then at the new moon we have a drop down with a fairly large bodied lower close day, followed by a low wick close almost near the top candle. And so what we started to notice was that there were correlations between the patterns, meaning if you took this first quarter phase and you came across this chart to this first quarter phase, these 2 sequences are following nearly in lockstep with one another. So watch as we go through this here together. The first quarter phase and the first quarter phase push above the prior swing high. So here's the prior swing high, the first quarter phase, that induction of energy into the system gets us above the prior swing. And so the new moon swing here at the second iteration of this constellation or this pattern closes us above the prior swing high. So that's the first similarity that we notice. Then we kind of tick off that large bull candle, and then this large bull candle sort of reappears, but on the other side of the full moon. So it's one day to the left over here, one day to the right over here, and that one takes us above the swing high that's intermediate. So you have this small swing high and then a close above. So then up here you have this small swing high and then a close above. So you sort of see like the tumblers of a lock being clicked or engaged by the teeth of a key. We get to the third quarter phase, and this historically sort of marks what I call the pile driver phase. We come into the high, and we have this pullback, an upthrust into an emotional high, and then a drop down, sort of like a professional wrestler lifting someone up by their ankles and pile driving their head into the mat. And so on this side, you'll see that same thing. I have them marked as candle 1. That pile driver pattern appears here. So you have the down leg, the up move, the pile drive down. The down leg, the up move at the third quarter, and then the pile drive down. Okay. Then we have a mild recovery back up, a mild recovery back up. And so right around the time Trump tweets this trade war thing breaking down, I find it suspicious that historically when we get near the new moons, there's a ebb of energy from the system, and historically those ebbs produce down moves. And we can look across historically and see where all the new moons are. With the exception of this little guy right here, about 80% of them produce fairly large drop-offs. And I found the timing curious that someone whose administration has more Goldman Sachs executives in it than any of the prior administrations would time that announcement on a day where historically people are more likely to panic. And so, not going too far down that rabbit trail, I really want to focus on the last 3 candles of this move up to and including today, because I think there's an opportunity for us if we're paying attention to it. When we get to this day right here, the new moon, in the first echo of the pattern, you'll notice that there are 3 candles down from the high. Okay, so starting at the new moon, if I draw an arrow right here, there are 3 candles down, and if I pull that arrow all the way down to the low, I can copy it. So now this arrow, everybody, is the same distance as the one that we just copied. Now, if I come up to this chart and I anchor the top of the arrow with the top of the new moon pattern, just shift it over here, you'll see that this distance has already been fulfilled today. So from the high of the first echo, the first primary constellation, to the low is the distance of that arrow. This arrow here is the same height. It's the same arrow. We just copied it. We cloned it. Now I want you to notice, if we draw a triangle from here to the low, and then I pull it out, if I take that triangle up to the current new moon, I want you to see where it lands in relation to today's low. In relation to today's low, it's touched it almost to the tick. Right there. Okay, so a lot of you probably figuring out where I'm going before I get there yet. So we've closed that sequence of sorts. And now, when you see that many overlapping structural similarities in terms of higher highs and higher lows, when you see that many overlaps in terms of what's happening at the various lunar phases, it's hard to not ask the question, what's next? It's hard to not ask the question, what's next? So looking at this chart, we see that the very next day pulls down about a third into the prior day before closing almost identically to the high, or rather the doji of the new moon phase. So if that were the case here, and if we close up, you can almost see that these candles now are, if we drew them with a crude line, do you notice how there's a very narrow body? I think these are called spinning tops, if I'm not mistaken. I want you to look at this pattern on March 8th, and then this pattern today over on May 8th. Kind of funny to the day, right? A month apart. And the bodies of the candles are almost identical. If you look at the prior day on the 7th, measure the height of the body of that low close day right here where I'm putting this rectangle. It'll be helpful for us if I take it and make it tomato colored, right? So it pops out. So now if I take that rectangle, everyone, and I just copy it, watch what happens when I put it on the prior candle right there. Okay, just squeak it up. They're identical in heights, right? Very similar in terms of body heights. So there are clues being laid here in terms of what's anticipated or expected. And so tomorrow, I would suspect overnight into tomorrow's close, we see the potential now for this to accelerate the other way. So let's just measure that really quickly. And yeah, there's my rectangle. So I'm going to take and measure that whole candle right here. And that's about the size of the body. And if we measure it here, we're kind of looking at coming back into the 2940 area, forgive me. 2940 area. Okay, so again, this is just looking at the lunar phases in relation to what's expected at these energy points. Energy is coming into and going out of the system. That energy affects mass psychology. We are electromagnetic creatures, and we receive that energy, and it sort of drives how we work and what we do. And again, now that you know what the different phases of the lunar patterns represent on this chart, it's hard to argue against the fact that there is an effect, right? And again, this is the ES June contract, and I have the lunar phases on top of it. But when we start to go down deeper into Alice's hole, the looking glass starts to get clearer. And so in this case, if we perceive that this pattern, this second echo, if you will, of the primary constellation of signals here, if that repeats, we're in for a fairly large bullish day tomorrow. And so the risk is pretty well defined below the low of this candle if there's any kind of options play or calls involved. And the upside target pretty much finishes out within a day of the full moon. So the next full moon here is also something that we can look up. All of these dates are obvious and calculatable, if that's a word. But I just wanted to share that thought with you today. We were actually watching for that line. You can see the blue line that I had my students looking for today for the bottom. And many of them got long down there and are doing really well right now. But that's what we're following. If you have any questions about that, please post your comments down below. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Thanks.